I used to love Christmas, the lights, the music, the warm sense of togetherness that felt almost magical. But that was before last year, before everything shattered. Now Christmas is nothing more than a reminder of what I lost. My name is Lillian. I moved to Juneau 5 years ago, chasing a quieter life far from the chaos of Brazil's bustling cities. My parents were Americans who raised me between two worlds, but Juneau felt like my chance to settle into one. Last Christmas, that illusion was torn apart. A man broke into my home, held my family at gunpoint, and robbed us of more than just our possessions. He stole my peace, my sense of safety. The police never caught him, and I've been haunted ever since. The snow fell heavily this December, blanketing the streets and muffling the sounds of the world. People in town seemed cheerier than usual, their faces glowing as they prepared for the holidays. I stayed home as much as possible, avoiding the festivities. The thought of Christmas, lights and cheerful carols made my stomach churn. That night, Clara, my best friend, convinced me to go to the town's Christmas market. "You can't hide forever," she'd said. Reluctantly, I agreed. Maybe a little time outside my self-imposed prison would help. The market was alive with activity, strings of lights twinkling against the dark Alaskan sky. Vendors sold everything, from hand-carved ornaments to steaming cups of mulled cider. Children laughed as they darted between stalls, their cheeks red from the cold. It should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the unease curling in my chest. I wandered aimlessly, my gloved hands shoved deep into my coat pockets. Clara had insisted on buying gifts and was somewhere in the crowd, leaving me alone. That's when I felt it, a prickle at the back of my neck. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned quickly, scanning the sea of faces. Families, couples, groups of friends, all laughing, talking, oblivious. Then I saw him. A man standing near the edge of the market, partially obscured by a stall selling knit scarves. He wore a black hooded jacket, his face shadowed, but his eyes were locked on me. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. Maybe he wasn't looking at me. Maybe it was just paranoia, the remnants of last year's trauma. I forced myself to look away, taking a deep breath. "Lillian!" Clara's voice jolted me out of my thoughts. She appeared, her arms full of shopping bags. "Ready to go?" "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. I glanced back to where the man had been standing, but he was gone. The drive home was quiet. The roads were slick with ice and the falling snow reflected the headlights, making it hard to see. Clara dropped me off at my house, a small, cozy place nestled against the woods. "You okay?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "I'm fine," I lied. "Call me if you need anything," she said. And I nodded, watching her car disappear down the road. Inside, the house was cold and silent. I locked the door behind me, double-checking it before drawing the curtains. My dog Max greeted me, wagging his tail, but even he seemed on edge. His ears perked up, and he let out a low growl, staring at the door. "It's okay, Max," I said, trying to reassure both him and myself. I went to the kitchen to make tea, the kettle's whistle breaking the oppressive silence. As I carried my cup to the living room, I noticed something odd. The porch light was flickering, casting erratic shadows across the snow. Max's growling grew louder, and he barked sharply, his body tense. I set the tea down and approached the window cautiously, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. At first I saw nothing, just the snow-covered yard and the dark outline of the forest beyond. But then I noticed them, footprints leading from the edge of the woods to my porch. My breath caught in my throat. They were fresh, too fresh to have. Been there before I came home. I stared at them, my mind racing. Who would come here? And why? Suddenly Max's barking turned frantic, and I jumped as a loud knock echoed through the house. It wasn't the friendly kind of knock. It was heavy, deliberate, demanding. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The knock came again, louder this time. My mind screamed at me to do something, but my body refused to move. Then, as abruptly as it started, the knocking stopped. The silence was deafening. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, my eyes glued to the door. Slowly, I crept closer, Max at my side, still growling. I peered through the peephole, but the porch was empty. I exhaled shakily, trying to convince myself it was just kids playing a prank. But when I opened the door to check, my blood ran cold. There, on the porch, was a single object, a knife. Its blade gleamed under the flickering light, the handle wrapped in a strip of red cloth. I slammed the door shut, locking it again, and backing away. My phone was in my hand before I realized it, and I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. As I waited for the police, I sat in the living room clutching Max, my mind racing with questions. Who was out there? What did they want? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning? Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the footprints and the knife in a pristine, undisturbed blanket. But the fear in my chest remained, heavy and unrelenting. This Christmas would be no different from the last. Darkness, silence, and the unshakable feeling that someone was watching. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, their flashing red and blue lights slicing through the darkness. 2 officers stepped out of the car, their boots crunching on the freshly fallen snow. I opened the door cautiously, Max barking furiously at my side. "Miss, you called about a disturbance?" one of them asked. His name tag read, Officer Daniels. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, on Christmas Eve. His partner, a younger woman named Officer Taylor, gave me a sympathetic smile as she surveyed the scene. I explained what had happened: the footprints, the knocking, and the knife. Daniels examined the weapon carefully, his expression unreadable. "Any idea who might have left this?" he asked. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "But I think someone was watching me at the market earlier. A man in a hooded jacket. He seemed to be following me." Taylor jotted down notes, nodding as I spoke. "Did you get a good look at him?" she asked. "Not really. He stayed in the shadows. But his eyes, they were..." I hesitated, unsure how to describe them. Cold. Empty. Like he was looking through me rather than at me. Daniels sighed, glancing at Taylor. "We'll patrol the area, but with this snow, any other tracks are probably already covered." He handed me his card. "If you see or hear anything else, call us, and keep your doors locked." As they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't take me seriously. To them, I was probably just another paranoid woman spooked by the season. But I knew what I'd felt, that prickle of fear, the certainty that someone was out there, watching, waiting. The next day, I couldn't bring myself to leave the house. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the knife and the hooded man. Max stayed close to me, his usual playful energy replaced by a nervous vigilance. Even he seemed to sense that something wasn't right. By evening, the snow had stopped, leaving a heavy blanket over the town. The world outside looked serene, but I felt anything but. I double-checked all the locks and closed the curtains tightly, refusing to let the darkness outside creep in. Around 8 p.m., the power went out. The hum of the refrigerator and the soft glow of the lamps disappeared, plunging the house into silence and shadow. Max whimpered, pressing against my leg as I fumbled for my phone. The flashlight cut through the darkness, but it only made the shadows feel deeper. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just the weather. Power outages weren't uncommon in Juneau during winter. Still, I couldn't shake the unease curling in my stomach. I grabbed a blanket and sat on the couch, Max curled up beside me. That's when I heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps on the snow outside. My breath caught, and I strained to listen. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped right outside the living room window. I held my breath, heart pounding in my ears. Slowly, I reached for my phone, ready to call the police again. But before I could dial, a shadow moved across the curtains. Someone was standing there just inches away, separated only by a thin pane of glass. Max erupted into frantic barking, the sound echoing through the silent house. The shadow lingered for a moment before moving away, disappearing into the night. My hands shook as I dialed 911, the operator's calm voice grounding me just enough to explain what had happened. Theo. Police arrived quickly this time. Daniels and Taylor swept the perimeter, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They found no sign of anyone, but Daniels noticed something chilling. A series of marks scratched into the wooden frame of the back door. "Looks like someone tried to force their way in," he said, his tone grim. "Why didn't they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe the dog scared them off," Taylor suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. Daniels turned to me, his expression serious. "We'll keep an eye on the area tonight, but if you can, maybe stay with a friend or family member for a while, just to be safe." I nodded, but the thought of leaving my home, the one place I should feel safe, felt unbearable. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows, set my nerves on edge. Max stayed by my side, his ears twitching at every sound. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion finally overtook me, and I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke to the sound of breaking glass. My eyes flew open, my heart racing as I tried to orient myself. Max was barking furiously, his body rigid with fear. The sound had come from the kitchen. Grabbing my phone, I dialed 911 again, whispering to the operator as I crept toward the source of the noise. The kitchen window had been shattered, shards of glass glittering on the floor like jagged ice. Cold air poured in, biting against my skin. Then I saw it. A footprint in the snow just outside the window. Large, unmistakably fresh, leading back toward the woods. The operator assured me that officers were on their way, but I couldn't wait. I grabbed a knife from the counter, my hands shaking as I clutched it tightly. Whoever had done this was still out there, and I wasn't going to let them get any closer. Max growled low in his throat, his eyes fixed on the broken window. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods, I heard it, the faint sound of laughter, cold and mocking, carried on the wind. I shivered, clutching the knife tighter as I backed away from the window. The police would be here soon. They had to be. But until then, I was on my own, and whoever was out there knew it. The night stretched on, the shadows growing longer and darker. By the time the police arrived, the laughter had stopped, and the footprints were gone, erased by the falling snow. But the fear remained heavy and unrelenting. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, the police returned, armed with questions and promises to patrol the area. Officer Taylor lingered, her concern etched in the lines of her face. "We'll find them," she assured me, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Whoever was tormenting me knew how to disappear, leaving only fear and shattered glass behind. I spent the day trying to put the pieces of my life back together, but the unease clung to me like frost on a window pane. Every noise, every shadow, every creak of the house felt like a threat. Max stayed glued to my side, his normally cheerful demeanor replaced by a tense vigilance. By nightfall, the storm had returned. The wind howled against the house, rattling the windows and covering the remnants of the previous night's chaos. In a fresh layer of snow, I tried to distract myself with a movie, but the screen's flickering light only made the shadows seem deeper. Around 10 p.m., the power went out again. My stomach dropped as the house plunged into darkness, the wind outside seeming to grow louder, more insistent. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, checking the locks on every door and window. That's when I noticed it, a faint glint of metal on the kitchen counter. My breath hitched as I realized what it was, the knife from the night before, but I had left it in the living room. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scanned the room, the flashlight's beam shaking in my trembling hand. The house was silent, except for the wind and Max's low growl. Someone had been inside. Someone was still inside. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I grabbed the knife, my knuckles white around the handle, and backed toward the living room. Max followed, his ears pinned back, his body tense. I dialed 911 again, whispering to the operator as I moved. "Someone's in my house," I said, my voice barely audible. "Please, send help." The operator's voice was calm, but her words did little to soothe me. "Stay on the line," she said. "Officers are on their way." I didn't hear them at first. The storm outside masked the sound of their footsteps, their breathing. But then out of the corner of my eye I saw movement, a shadow slipping through the doorway, silent and deliberate. The hooded man from the market stepped into the beam of my flashlight, his face obscured by the shadows of his hood. He held a knife of his own, its blade catching the light as he advanced. "Why?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled, a cold, cruel twist of his lips that sent ice through my veins. He lunged, and I barely managed to sidestep the blade grazing my arm. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but adrenaline kept me moving. Max launched himself at the intruder, teeth bared, but the man was ready. He kicked Max hard, sending him yelping to the floor. Rage bubbled up in me, cutting through the fear. I swung my knife, aiming for anything I could reach, and felt the high, satisfying resistance as the blade connected with flesh. He snarled, stumbling back, his hand clutching his side. Blood stained his jacket, dark and spreading, but it didn't stop him. He came at me again, his movements wild and desperate. I ducked, dodging his strikes, but the cramped space worked against me. The fight felt endless, a brutal, clumsy dance of survival. He managed to pin me against the wall, his knife pressing against my throat. "You ruined everything," he hissed, his breath hot and rancid against my face. "I don't even know you," I spat, my voice raw with defiance. He laughed, the sound more animal than human. "Oh, but I know you. I've been watching you. You and your perfect little life." Before he could finish, Max lunged at him again, sinking his teeth into the man's leg. He screamed, the knife clattering to the floor as he tried to shake Max off. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the fallen knife and drove it into his shoulder with all the strength I could muster. He howled, collapsing to the floor as blood pooled beneath him. I scrambled away, clutching Max as the sound of sirens finally broke through the storm. The police burst in moments later, their guns drawn, their faces hard with determination. The aftermath was a blur. Paramedics treated my wounds while officers took my statement. The intruder was barely conscious when they loaded him into the back of a squad car, his face pale and twisted with pain. "You're lucky to be alive," Taylor said, her voice soft but firm. "He's been on our radar for months. A drifter with a violent past. We'll make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." But her words did little to comfort me. The house felt tainted, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. Even with the intruder gone, the fear remained, a permanent scar etched into my soul. Christmas morning came with a bitter clarity. The snow outside sparkled under the pale light of dawn, a stark contrast to the darkness I felt inside. I sat on the couch, Max's head resting on my lap, and stared at the broken window, the jagged edges a reminder of how fragile safety truly is. I survived, but survival came at a cost. The scars on my arm would heal, but the ones on my mind and heart were permanent. I would never look at Christmas the same way again. It wasn't a season of joy or peace. It was a season of survival, a time to remember that the world could be as cold and cruel as the Alaskan winter. And as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, I made a promise to myself. I would never let fear control me again. Because, no matter how dark the night, the dawn always comes, and I would face it, scars and all. The rain beat against the windows with a hypnotic cadence as I tried to relax on the sofa, the TV murmuring in the background. It was my ritual on Friday nights, a silent pause from the exhausting routine of teaching. My socks were wet. I had probably stepped in a puddle near the entrance while rushing in to escape the storm. The clock on the wall read 10:47. The night was still young, but fatigue already weighed heavily. I lived on a dead-end street, surrounded by trees that swayed like grotesque shadows in the lightning. I loved the tranquility of the place, but there were nights when the silence was so deep it became oppressive. That night there was something different. The silence seemed charged. I got up to get some tea in the kitchen. As I passed the window that looked out onto the backyard, I noticed the curtain was open. I didn't remember leaving it that way. The outdoor light, usually on, was off due to the storm, but I still felt the strange sensation that something was watching me. In the kitchen, as the kettle heated, the subtle sound of something falling upstairs made me freeze. My mind immediately found excuses. The house is old, maybe the wind, or just my imagination. I didn't go up to check. I just pretended I hadn't heard it. I returned to the living room, the hot tea in my hands, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. That's when I saw the reflection in the window glass. Something moved quickly, far enough away to seem unreal, but close enough to make me gasp. I set the cup on the table, my hands trembling. I stood up slowly, trying to ignore the weight of fear that now seemed to have taken over every corner of the house. The lights flickered intermittently, making everything even more disturbing. I walked to the back door to check if it was locked. It was, but something strange caught my attention. A wet footprint on the rug. I stared at it for a long moment, unable to comprehend. It wasn't mine. The print was large, with the clear outlines of a boot. The air seemed to have grown heavier. I could only hear the sound of the rain, but I was sure there was something more. A presence, an invisible weight. I went back to the living room window, my breath ragged. I looked outside, and this time I saw it clearly. A shadow moved among the trees, too fast to make out any details. My phone was on the table. I grabbed it, but the screen read, "No signal." The storm had probably knocked out the communication towers. A deafening thunderclap echoed, and all the lights went out. I stood in the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I realized I was no longer alone. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the intermittent flashes of lightning that cast grotesque silhouettes across the room. I remained still, trying to control my breathing as every sound around me seemed amplified. The rain against the glass, the wind howling outside, and most disturbingly, faint footsteps coming from somewhere inside the house. My instinct screamed for me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. I gripped my phone tightly, as if it could protect me. But there was still no signal. The only weapon within reach was a kitchen knife that I clutched with trembling fingers as I moved to the side of the room, where I had a partial view of the stairs. "Is anyone there?" My voice came out in a trembling whisper that didn't sound like my own. I immediately shivered as I heard a creak in response coming from upstairs. Go up or go out. My mind wrestled with the two options, but the storm outside seemed as threatening as the unknown inside the house. I decided to go up. It made no sense to leave an intruder behind me. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound echoing like an alarm in the morbid silence of the house. When I reached the top, I noticed that the door to my bedroom was slightly open. It swayed gently, as if inviting or mocking me. I should have run. I knew that. But a morbid curiosity and the desire to confront whatever was there pushed me forward. I opened the door carefully, my hand gripping the knife until my knuckles turned white. The room was empty, at least at first glance. My attention was drawn to the closet, whose door was slightly open. A metallic smell, strong and nauseating, invaded my nostrils. I advanced slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. I pushed the closet, door open with the knife, ready to defend myself. What I found was not an intruder, but a bloodied handkerchief thrown on the floor. My eyes scanned the hanging clothes, searching for movement, a shape, anything. Nothing. But the smell persisted, and now my mind began to play tricks on me. I turned to leave the room when I noticed something in the mirror beside the bed. Words, written in what appeared to be dried blood. Watch. My throat tightened. I was being hunted. It wasn't just someone invading my home. It was someone enjoying this. I ran downstairs, the sound of my footsteps almost drowning out the noises that now came from all over the house. The front door was open, although I was sure I had locked it. Outside, in the light of a lightning flash, I saw a figure standing in the rain. It didn't move, just stared at me. I rushed back inside and locked the door, my whole body shaking. That's when I heard it. a whistle coming from behind me from the middle of the room. The sound of the whistle froze my blood. I turned slowly, my heart almost leaping out of my throat, but the room seemed empty. The air was thick, and the silence returned like a suffocating curtain. The knife in my hand now felt useless, a piece of metal against something I barely understood. "Who's there?" My voice broke the quiet, but no one answered. Only the sound of the whistle returned, this time coming from the kitchen. I walked hesitantly, each step accompanied by the subtle creaking of the wooden floor. When I reached the kitchen entrance, the knife slipping from my sweaty hand, I noticed that all the drawers were open. The knives that usually rested there had disappeared. On the floor, a single word written in something red, almost black: "Obey." My face, eyes filled with tears, the fear turning into desperation. Whoever it was, they were playing with me, tearing away every piece of my sanity. My body trembled as my mind struggled to process. How did this person know so much? Why me? That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around quickly, the knife raised, but the hallway was empty. The whistling started again, this time louder, coming from the living room. I knew it made no sense, but something compelled me to follow the sound. As I entered the living room, the first lightning flash illuminated the figure. He was there, standing in the middle of the room, tall and still, wearing a simple white expressionless mask. His gaze, even hidden, seemed to burn into my soul. "Why?" was all I could manage, my voice barely coming out. He tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing my question, and then took a step forward. Instinctively, I took a step back. My body trembled. The air felt too heavy to breathe. "You're interesting, Sarah," he finally said, his voice low, sharp, like glass being dragged over metal. "I've watched you. You never noticed, did you?" My legs gave way, and I fell to the floor. The knife slipped from my hand and stopped far from me, out of reach. "Why are you doing this?" I begged, tears now streaming down my face. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked slowly until he was right in front of me. With a chilling calm, he crouched down and whispered in my ear, "Because I can." A crash outside, a thunderclap, or maybe something more, and he disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. The police arrived about an hour later, called by neighbors who heard my screams. They searched the house but found nothing. No footprints, no mask, no sign of the intruder. Just me, huddled on the floor, unable to articulate more than an incoherent mumble. They said it was probably a scare, a burglar who fled. But I knew the truth. He wasn't an ordinary thief. He knew who I was. He knew where I was, what I did, and that I would never be truly safe. I moved days later, but it doesn't matter where I go. I feel him. In the darkness, in the silence, in the reflection of the mirror. He's there. He always will be. And worse still, he promised he would return. My name is Anna. I'm 34 years old, and until recently I thought I had my life under control. I work as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in Denver, a job that demands most of my time and energy. After my divorce, I bought a modest house in the suburbs, a quiet escape from the chaos of the ER. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, a small refuge where I could rebuild myself. That was before the flowers arrived. It was a Tuesday, and I was finishing a grueling 12-hour shift when I found a bouquet waiting for me in the break room. The roses were blood red, their petals so pristine they almost looked fake. Nestled among them was a note. "For the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." At first, I thought it was from a coworker, maybe an awkward attempt at flirting. But no one stepped forward, and something about it felt wrong. The handwriting was sharp, jagged, as if carved into the paper with force. I threw the note away, laughed it off with my colleagues, and told myself it didn't mean anything. But then, there was the second note. I found it 2 nights later, tucked under the windshield wiper of my car in the hospital parking lot. I see. You. The words were simple, but they ignited a cold terror deep in my chest. I looked around the nearly empty lot, my eyes scanning the dark corners and shadowed cars. Nothing. No movement. Just the wind howling through the empty space. I shoved the note into my purse and drove home, every turn of the wheel tightening, the knot of fear in my stomach. When I got home, I locked every door and window. It felt ridiculous, paranoid even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I didn't sleep much that night, jumping at every creak of the house settling, every gust of wind rattling the windows. A week passed, and I convinced myself it was all in my head. Maybe it was a prank, maybe someone got the wrong person. But then, I started noticing things. The fence in my backyard had been shifted, the wooden slats bent inward as if someone had climbed over it. A picture frame on my living room wall had been moved ever so slightly, something I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't dusted it the day before. Then, one evening, as I was locking up for the night, I realized the kitchen window was open. I never leave that window open. I called the police the next day. The officer who came to my house, Officer David Carter, was kind but dismissive. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear evidence that anyone had been inside. He told me to stay vigilant, to call if anything else happened. I wanted to believe him, to trust that I was safe, but I wasn't. The phone calls started a few days later, always in the middle of the night when the world was dark and silent. At first it was just static, a low hiss that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Then came the breathing, slow, deliberate, and so close it felt like the caller was standing right next to me. I stopped answering the phone after the third call, but the messages kept coming. Anna. The way my name slithered out of the voicemail felt personal, intimate, like a lover whispering in the dark. By now, my house didn't feel like a refuge. It felt like a cage, and I was the trapped animal. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light became a potential threat. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow, though I wasn't sure what I'd do if I actually had to use it. The final straw came one night as I was brushing my teeth. I glanced at the mirror and froze. Written in lipstick on the bathroom window were the words, "You can't hide from me." I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice caught in my throat as I stood there, paralyzed by the realization that someone had been inside my home. The police found no fingerprints, no evidence of forced entry. They chalked it up to a prank and left me with a hollow reassurance that they'd keep an eye on things, but I knew. This wasn't a prank, this was just the beginning. The flowers and the notes were unsettling. The lipstick message on the mirror was terrifying. But the photos, that was when my world shattered. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. I woke up, trying to shake the fog of another sleepless night, and went to grab the mail. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a plain white envelope with no return address. My name was written on the front in the same jagged handwriting I'd seen before. I tore it open, my hands trembling. Inside were 5 glossy photographs. The first was of me in my scrubs, walking to my car after a shift. The second was taken through the window of my living room. I was curled up on the couch, oblivious. The third was of me sleeping in my bed, the moonlight casting shadows across my face. The fourth showed me standing in the shower, steam blurring my outline but not enough to obscure my vulnerability. The last one was of my house, taken from the street, with the caption scrawled across the bottom. "I'm always watching." I dropped the envelope and backed away, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He had been inside my house. He had stood over me while I slept. The thought made my stomach churn. I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained the photos. Officer David Carter arrived within the hour, his expression grim as he flipped through the pictures. This time he didn't dismiss me. "We'll open a formal investigation," he said. "But you need to take precautions, install cameras, change your locks, maybe stay with someone for a while." "Stay with someone?" I asked, my voice rising. "I shouldn't have to run from my own home." David sighed. "I know it's not fair, Anna, but whoever this is, they're escalating. We need to keep you safe." I nodded, but the words felt hollow. Safe? There was no such thing anymore. That night I installed cameras around the house. I locked every door and window, triple-checking each one before going to bed. My phone sat on the nightstand, the emergency number already dialed, ready for me to press call at the first sign of trouble. It didn't help. At 2:37 a.m., I woke to the sound of glass shattering. My heart raced as I grabbed the knife from under my pillow and crept to the bedroom door. The house was silent, except for the faint creak of floorboards downstairs. The camera feed on my phone showed a figure in black moving through the living room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and methodical, his movements deliberate as he examined the photos on my mantel, the books on my shelves. I pressed the emergency call button, whispering to the dispatcher that someone was in my house. She told me to stay on the line and hide until the police arrived, but then the figure turned toward the stairs. My blood turned to ice as I realized he was coming for me. I barricaded myself in the bathroom, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I listened to the heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. "Anna," a deep voice called, muffled through the door. "I just want to talk." I didn't answer. The doorknob rattled, then twisted violently. "Anna," he said again, more insistent this time. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Suddenly, the sound of sirens cut through the night, their wailing growing louder as they approached. The man cursed under his breath, his footsteps retreating. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. David stayed behind after the other officers left, helping me clean up the broken glass and trying to reassure me, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "This guy's not going to stop," he said finally. "We'll catch him, Anna, I promise." But promises didn't mean much anymore. 2 days later, I found another envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a single photo, a close-up of my terrified face, taken through the crack in the bathroom door that night. Underneath it, in that same jagged handwriting, were the words, "Next time, the cops won't save you." I spent the next week in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside the window felt like him. The cameras recorded nothing unusual, but that didn't ease my mind. I knew he was out there, waiting, watching. David checked in on me daily, his voice always steady, always reassuring. He promised they were closing in on the man, though he wouldn't tell me how they knew. His visits were the only thing keeping me tethered to reality, but even David couldn't protect me when it finally happened. It was a Friday night, and I had just returned from a late shift. The hospital was short-staffed again, and I was too exhausted to eat, too drained to care about anything but collapsing into bed. As I walked into my house, I noticed something strange. The air smelled metallic, sharp, like blood. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to step inside. That's when I saw it. The walls of my living room were covered in photos, hundreds of them, all of me. Walking to my car, working at the hospital, sleeping in my bed. Some were recent, others clearly taken months ago. In the center of the wall was a message scrawled in dark red paint. "This is where it ends." I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. My hand instinctively went to my phone, but before I could call for help, the lights flickered and went out. The house plunged into darkness. I grabbed the knife I now carried everywhere and backed into the kitchen, my heart hammering in my chest. My hands were slick with sweat, making it hard to keep a firm grip on the blade. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. "Anna," his voice drawled, low and menacing. "Why do you keep running from me? Don't you see we're meant to be together? Stay away from me." I screamed, my voice cracking. He laughed, a chilling, guttural sound that echoed through the house. "You're so beautiful when you're scared." I swung the knife blindly as the footsteps grew closer. My breathing was ragged, my vision swimming with tears. Then out of the corner of my eye I saw movement. He lunged at me. The struggle was brutal. His strength was overwhelming, and despite my desperate attempts to fight back, he managed to pin me against the kitchen counter. His face was hidden behind a black mask, but his eyes burned with a terrifying intensity. I jabbed the knife into his shoulder, eliciting a guttural cry of pain. He staggered back, clutching the wound, giving me just enough time to break free. Ran to the front door, but he was faster. He tackled me to the ground, his hands closing around my throat. The world blurred as I gasped for air, clawing at his arms, my vision darkening at the edges. Suddenly there was a loud bang. When I came to, David was crouched over me, his face pale and strained. Behind him, I saw the stalker's lifeless body, sprawled on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. David's gun was still in his hand, his knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. "You're safe now," he said, though his voice wavered. But I wasn't. In the days that followed, I moved out of the house. I told myself that a fresh start in a new place would help me heal. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the memories. The photos, the notes, the feeling of his hands around my throat. It all haunted me. I jumped at every knock on the door, every unexpected sound. I kept the knife under my pillow, even though I knew he was dead. And then one night, I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock on the window. My blood ran cold as I turned toward the sound. No one was there. But on the glass, written in condensation, were the words, "I told you. You can't hide. The nightmare never ends." Not really. It just finds new ways to crawl under your skin. Thank you so much for watching. If this story sent chills down your spine and left you craving more, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us out. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another haunting tale, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on our latest uploads. Also, check out the video that's playing on your screen right now. It's another gripping story you won't want to miss. Trust me, it's one you'll be thinking about long after it's over. Your support keeps these stories coming, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Stay safe and stay scared.